Folks, we're on our 10th step of our journey through Nach, where we are starting. We're going through every chapter, every perek once a week. Let's go. So here we go. So our topic this week is going to be the access and the conquest of the Heartland. This is, this perek is so unbelievable. There's so much to talk about, to learn about together in this chapter. It's we hardly have enough time. But this is one of the most incredible battles where we've seen to date, and this is really the gateway to the heartland of Israel. That's where we're at. Let's do a quick recap of the perek with a few psukim that highlight what's going on, and then we'll try to sink into what's trying to process this. So, if you remember, just a moment ago, we had this city called Gibeon, and they make a deal with Israel. They make an alliance, and they say that, and it's under false pretenses, and Israel falls for it, and they make this alliance. And nonetheless, instead of killing them, they keep their deal. Now that commitment is going to be tested. So here's the deal. What happens is the surrounding kings, the kings in the hills of Judea, what we call today Judea, in those days it was Canaan. In those days, the 5 kings got together and they said, look, this is not a good thing. Gibeon just defected, right? So what they do is they create an axis or an alliance to attack not Israel, but they attack Gibeon. Meaning they attack the defector. So Gibeon was a very large city. It's in fact larger than Ai, as it's described. And we hear about in Pasuk Hey, Vayasvu Vayalu Chameshes Malchei Amorim Melech Yerushalayim, Melech Hebron, Melech Yarmus, Melech Lachish, Melech Eglon, Haim V'Kol Machaneim Vayachanu Al Gibeon. So they besiege the city of Gibeon, and this is where the battle is about to begin. And so, as you can imagine, what happens? So Gibeon sends out messengers to Israel and says, "Please help! You made a deal with us, and we're your servants. Please help us, save us." Right? And at this point in time, you can kind of imagine what the Israelites must be saying to themselves. Like, why do we need them? Right? They lied to us, they deceived us, and now they're asking for help. Goodbye and good luck, as you would say. But nonetheless, Israel does not do that. Yehoshua comes up from Gilgal, which is where they're encamped, just by the banks of the Jordan, and they come to fight this war. God, Hashem says to them, you're going to succeed. And so they do. They come up, and we were told that they make a night tour of duty. So the soldiers ascend Route 1, right? They're going from Gilgal up to the route to Jerusalem, to the mountains of Judea. They do it overnight. They surprise the enemy and attack them in such a way that the enemy doesn't even know what's happening. Vayumeim, the pasuk tells us they're confused and they're fleeing from Israel. Unbelievable in this battle. But then it gets better. You think this is a military victory? There's much more that's going on. Here we go. Look at pasuk Yud Aleph for a second. I highlighted this. Vayihi ben As'am ibnei Yisrael haim b'morad beis Choron. They're on the edges of the area called Beit Choron. We'll see in a second where this is. V'Hashem yishlich aleihem avonim gedolos min hashamayim ad azeka vayamusu. God threw stones from heaven down upon them. Rabim asher meisu mavnei abarad me'asher haragu b'nei Yisrael becharev. More people died in the stones that were falling from heaven than died even in battle itself. Unbelievable. So there's some sort of miraculous experience. I'll have to examine what that means in a second. They are dying as they are running from Israel in Beit Choron. And then, even better, it gets even more unbelievable, where the next pasuk tells us, Az yidaber Yehoshua la Hashem, bayom teis Hashem es amori lifnei bnei Yisrael. Then Yehoshua spoke about the day when the Amorites are given in their hands. What does that remind you of? What do those words sound like? This is Az yidaber Yehoshua, Az yashir Moshe, right? This is like clearly the parallel to the song, and it is a song. Why? Vayomer le'nei Yisrael, and he said in the eyes of Israel, Shemesh begivon dom v'yarech b'emek Ayalon. The sun will stand still, and the moon will stand still in the Emek, or the valley of Ayalon, and above Givon. Vayidom HaShemesh v'yorech amad ad yikom goyov v'lo yiksu b'al sefer Yashar v'yamod HaShemesh b'chatzi HaShamayim v'lo yotz l'voy kiyom tamim. And that's what happened. It's written in the book of Yashar, which we'll have to see what that means in a second. The Tanakh is referring to another book. It's written in the book of Yashar, the straight book, and this incident. And the sun stood for 24 hours. It stood for a singular day, still in its path as they conquered their enemies. Unbelievable, right? And that's what happens. They conquer them. And then we hear a little further in this battle that as they chase them westwards, because remember they were now moving from the mountains to the Shvela, we're moving to the coastal plain as they're running. The kings of these 5 cities are hiding in caves. Why they are separate from their troops, it's not clear. It doesn't sound like they were fighting. These were more like the Egyptian generals, So so the folks are hiding in their caves, and Yehoshua, an interesting command. He says, close up the mouths of the caves, and we'll deal with them later. And he goes off and he fights, and he makes the people follow the command to kill those who are fleeing, the refugees from the war, the soldiers from the war, and then he comes back, opens the caves, takes out the kings, and he makes a demonstration. He brings the officers of his army. He says, place your foot on their necks, and you should know that just like they are dying, just like they are going to fall before you, all the nations will fall in front of you. They kill them, hang them up till evening, like we saw before, and then bury them under a pile of stones. And then the rest of the perek goes through sequentially battle after battle after battle that we hear about as Israel destroys. They destroy Makedah, they destroy Livna, then Lachish comes to their aid and is also destroyed. And we hear about the king of Gezer, which is in the coastal plain, comes to attack, and they're destroyed. Eglon comes to attack them, and they're destroyed. They go and destroy Hebron, and it describes battle after battle after battle that Israel has in an incredible string of victories, leading to what seems to be a complete tour of the southern region militarily. And that's why the perek ends on page 3, top of page 3. Vayakei Yehoshua es kol haaretz hahar v'hanegev ha'shvela v'hashroi ha'ashdos. It's called Malkeim v'lo yishir sarid. There was no one who survived. It's called Neshama echrim kasher tziva Hashem. Like Israel, everything was destroyed in the last pasuk. V'eis kol hamlachim ha'ele es artzam lakad Yehoshua pamachas. He destroyed them in one tour, one moment. This all happened. This is an incredible story of victory. So let's just get a sense of where we are, what's going on over here. So we're talking about the region that is just to the north of Jerusalem and all the way south from that. Meaning we're not talking about the northern reaches of the country, we're talking about what we would generally call today Judea mostly. Right, so Samaria, Shomron is north of Jerusalem. This is mostly just a little bit north of Yerushalayim, which is where Givon is, and mostly south from there. So if you look at the map that I put on page 3, it's not always so easy to see, but just above the Dead Sea on the right is where Israel is encamped. That's in Gilgal. That's their base. So they're not staying in the Heartland. They're staying on in the valley of the Dead Sea, of the Jordan Valley. And they're moving up the mountains to now. They first attacked Ai, as we know, but now we see them moving westwards as they conquer city after city, and they come back. They loop back on a southern loop as they come back. I put the relief map of today of what it looks like today with the modern names on the bottom of page 3, but just to get a sense of this is on page 4 is the map of the Dat Mikra, to get a sense of how these wars work. They go from just above the Dead Sea, Yam HaMelach is Gilgal. They go to Beit El and Ha'ai, and then Givon is right there. It's just an hour south of them. And then we see all these conquests. We see the kings who come up to attack them. We see Beit Choron is to the west as they move towards the left. And they move southwards, attacking these different places, Azekah, Livna, Lachish, Eglon, and they come back to Hebron. So it's like sort of a circle round, moving towards the coastal plain, going down to the southern regions and coming back, looping back to the east as they complete a circuit. It should be known, just to appreciate this, that the Israel of the yesteryear was not the Israel of today. The southernmost region was Beersheba and Kadesh. We'll get to Kadesh Barnea in a second, but it's framed by the mountain range. The Negev was not at this point in time, and we'll see, was not in Israel first time. So this is really the southern region of Israel that's being conquered in this. And there's a lot of things you need to appreciate this. So first thing to appreciate is why, if you were a Canaanite king, if you're the king of Jerusalem, you're the king of Hebron, why would you attack Givon? Right? Meaning, like, out of all the places, make an alliance, pull your forces and attack Israel. Right? That would be the most logical thing to do. Right? If you're militarily, because remember, we're not talking about nations; we're talking about city-states, right? Meaning to say, the way it worked in those days, although there were different nations that populated these cities, each city really was its own king, and they controlled the fields and the local villages. It was like a fiefdom, right? And so now, for them to wage war, the different cities needed to make an alliance, and that's what we're seeing here. We see a 5-city alliance against the Gibeonites. And so, it's a very strange thing. So, the most basic understanding, this is what the Metzuros points out, is that if there's going to be further defectors, if there's going to be further people who are going to break rank, it's a very dangerous thing. You need to stamp out defectors right at the beginning, and you need not just stamp them out. You make an example of them, right? This works on a singular level, right? So if you have people who are deserting the army, they're court-martialed, right? And it's a very serious offense because it's going to break ranks. So this is now on a larger scale, right? So you have Givon, which is a large city. If other cities are going to go and play their subterfuge with Israel and going to start playing games with their enemy, that's a very bad thing. So I say, let's wipe them out as an example so that we can hold the area. That's what it seems to be. At the same time, the Malbim points out that it was a little bit of a waste of military force. And he points out that God really allowed them to make a mistake, meaning he allowed them to make a mistake to waste their military effort on a local city so that it would pull Israel in and would really open up the gates to the heartland. What fascinates me is why is that Israel came to their aid. Because you could just say like this: if you were the minister of war in Israel at that point in time, and you let's say you spoke to your advisors, your chief of staff, your generals, and said, "Listen, is this worth our effort?" I think most people would say, "Look, it was a mistake. It was very nice that you felt that these folks were from probably North Africa and you made an alliance with them. But at the end of the day, it was under false pretenses, and now they got their problems. Call us when it's over, and then we'll come in and we'll take care of it. When heathens are fighting heathens, right? Let them, let the best man win, and we'll take care of the winner afterwards. That should be the attitude. Why waste our military force? And this is an incredibly important distinguishing moment in Israel's history, because again, one of the things we had to consider, and this is not something we've had to think about for almost 2,000 years, is what happens when the Jews are in control. Such an important question, meaning Jews have not been in control from the year 135 Common Era till the year 1948. Jews are not in control. Jews followed the rules and the laws of some other government that at a certain point did not protect them from the masses, or the libels, or the pogroms, or the autodafes, and whatever else we had to deal with in Jewish history. We were defending ourselves, right? So what happens when Israel actually is in charge of its country, right? What happens when we are the power? We set the rules. And this happened for 1,000 years at the beginning, and now we've had 77 years where we've had that opportunity to think like this again. So not all people live under your control are Jewish, just the way it is. It wasn't then and it isn't now. So what do you do with those folks? So the Torah has a prescription. There's a prescription called a ger toshav, right? The person's going to live. He's accepting monotheistic religion. He's not becoming Jewish. We're not proselytizing. We're not forcing people to convert. But they live under they live within the rubric of understanding that there needs to be a Jewish state. And but they live as a non-Jew, and they are protected in such a state as well. So we see the Torah prescribes such a thing a number of times, and we see that the first time this is expressed is by the Gibeonites, even though it was under subterfuge, meaning even though they did not do it in an upright fashion. Now the question becomes is, what is Israel going to do? What is going to be the tone of a country run by Israelites? How is that going to look when a minority is attacked? This is a really important question because it's going to set the tone for the way we govern ourselves. And by the way, it's something which is so foreign to the Middle East even today. What happens when a minority is attacked in a Middle East country, right? Think about it, the way that the countries are drawn up today has nothing to do with the cultural reality on the ground, right? If you go to 1916 and you looked at the Pikes-Sickert plan, which was the French-British plan to divide up the resources of the Middle East, if you will, right? More than the peoples of the Middle East. I mean, the lines they drew were ridiculous. Meaning, they gave, they decided that, they want to give a little bit of, at the end of the day, they gave a little bit to the Arabians in Saudi Arabia, and they created a new country because of one little fiefdom. But then the French took the north, the British took the south, and but you can look at all the plans, of the mandates of Britain and French, the Levant, it does not match what was going on the ground, because there's multiple different tribes that are there, right? There's the Arabs, but the Arabs, they happen to be a majority, but there are lots of other folks there, right? So there's Kurds, Alawites, there's Druze, there's like a lot of other folks on the ground. It's interesting that today, the self-determination of the Druze and the Alawites and the Kurds mission has not reached the universities yet for some reason. I don't know. I don't see people marching for the independence and self-determination and statehood of all these other majorities. And the reason is because they're not in Jewish countries. They're under Turkey and under Syria, and so nobody really cares if Arabs are killing their own. But nonetheless, that is the reality on the ground. The Kurds deserve their own country, and the Turks and the Syrians are not going to give them their own country, and nobody really cares as they kill them. So, but the question is, what do you do with your minorities? And just recently, Israel was put to this test. What happened when in southern Syria the Druze were attacked? And it's an astonishing thing. Unfortunately, you read the news. The news is so incredibly false and biased. I was just reading the BBC report on this. You remember this is in July, right? So in July 2025, there was an attack on a Druze village, and some of the Druze in Israel tried to get to the Druze in Syria, and Israel then prevented them but attacked the Syrian forces, if you remember this. So the way the BBC reports it, let me just make sure that we feel a sense of revulsion, is that it's Israel's territorial expansionism, right? While with a local Bedouin Druze fight that's going on, which is not theirs. That wasn't exactly what happened. If you actually read what really happened, is Syrian government soldiers were slaughtering Druze. Right, this was government-sanctioned slaughter. 1,000 Druze were killed by the government. In fact, if you read the government communications, they told the soldiers to switch off their body cams while they were slaughtering them. I mean, this is genocide, right? Nobody cared. Nobody in the world. All the pro-Palestinian encampments and all the people completely silent because they don't care about anybody except if it's a Jew doing something. And then Israel came to their aid. And that was a distinguishing moment. And I believe, I was actually with Rabbi Foreman for lunch on a Shabbos, and he said such a profound thing, because he happens to be learning Sefer Yehoshua with his son, and we were discussing this because we were learning Sefer Yehoshua together. And he said, it's a remarkable thing. When in the Middle East has it happened that the minority of another country is protected by a neighboring power? Think about that. Israel took risk, and by the way, the Secretary of State here was not so pleased with Israel's actions in Syria. They felt this was unnecessary. When in the Middle East have you ever seen one country protecting the minority of another country? And that is exactly this question over here. The question that is at hand is, how do you relate to unprotected minorities in other countries? And by the way, do you have to, technically speaking? The answer is no. Did Israel, technically speaking, have to protect the Gibeonites? No. But they did. And that sets the tone for what it means to be a power in the Middle East, a power built on morality, not built on the currency of power, money, or influence. It's a very different perspective, and this is going to serve us very well. In fact, not just serve us well. This is not why Israel did this, but we will notice, if you look at the narrative of this perek, that what opened up the gate to central Israel was this. Meaning, when you stand up for the disenfranchised allies, that opens up the future, right? You notice that? Just like, let's follow the story. It's really important to appreciate this, because in the Middle East, not everybody reads BBC. Unfortunately, a lot of them read Al Jazeera. But if you're looking on the ground, something happened this July, which is you realize that the only country which is going to stand up for a minority in this area is Israel, and people realize that. And that's a very important thing. The only country, the only people who stood up for the Gibeonites was Israel, even though they did not need to stand up for them, technically speaking. Right? This is a very important moment. It's a watershed moment in Israelite history, which is going to map out how we appreciate things in the future. Let's go a little further here. Yeah.
Also in their strategic interest to create a buffer zone.
It is. But in the end of the day, let's think about it. Let them fight each other. Right? Gibeon's a big city. It's a walled city. It's going to take a long time to conquer. Let them exhaust themselves, and we'll come afterwards. And by the way, no one will know. Meaning, will anybody know that there was a fake deal that was made? No. Let them kill each other. Right? In round 9 in the boxing match, right? They're both hanging out in the corner there. We'll kill them both. Right? That's what we could have done, but that's not moral. And that's the point. That's exactly what's being said over here. It's just so important to appreciate. And by the way, the Tanakh is very honest about this, right? The Tanakh is going to be very honest about our wins morally and our losers. And this is a win morally, what we did over here. Incredible. And it happened to be historically, God seemed to say, I like this plan. I like what you're doing, because clearly God facilitated this battle. Let's get into that facilitation for a second, because it's just pretty amazing. So let's start off. We have these large hailstones. The amazing thing is, we are so blessed. You don't even realize how blessed we are as Jews. You see, we, in this room, learned Hebrew, which means when we open up a Tanakh, we can read it as God said it, which is not the way when it comes to if you're another religion, right? So if you're a Christian and you're reading the Bible and you're trying to figure out in English, do you know how many translations of the Bible there are? You have no idea what the Bible's saying, because you aren't reading it in the way it was said, right? You can read it in Spanish and in French. Was that what God said? No, that's a translation, and every translation is an interpretation too. Let me give you an example. The King James Bible of this verse about the hail, right? So it says, and it came to pass, as they fled before Israel, in source 5, and they were going down to Beth Horon, that's Beth Horon, and the Lord cast down great stones from the heaven upon them unto Azekah, and they died. Okay, so that is the translation of what's happened according to the King James Bible. Listen to the New Living Translation, because by the way, you can get this. There's tens and tens of translations of the Bible just into English. And the Amorites retreated from down the road from Beth Horon, and the Lord destroyed them with a terrible hailstorm from the heaven that continued until they reached Azekah. So notice the newer translation of the Bible into English is telling us what actually happened. Bad weather. Right? It was very unfortunate. They really should have checked their weather apps before they started this war, but nonetheless they didn't, and they were caught in a terrible hailstorm. And you know how it goes. If you're running away, and besides for having to speak to the auto insurance about all the dents in the car, this is a really bad one. They got killed. A number of people were killed in this terrible hailstorm. You notice, by the way, that the translation is interpreting, right? It's turned from the King James Bible, stones from the heaven. It's now turning into hailstones, because that's what makes sense. That's the interpretation. The problem is like this: if it was hailstones, it doesn't make sense in Jewish history for the following reason. This is a brisa in Brachos Daf Nun Dalet, where the brisa tells us that there are a number of sites in Israel that warrant a bracha. Listen to this. The brisa tells us in source 7, Tana Rabbanan, Haroem Avros Hayam. If you come to the place where you see Kriyas Yamsuf. Now, by the way, folks, it's hard to know exactly where Israel crossed into the Red Sea, but if you fly, you actually can see it. Why? Because like this, when there used to be direct flights from South Africa to Israel, unfortunately, El Al is no longer flying to South Africa. There's not enough people to warrant it, and also South Africa is unfortunately not on the good sides of Israel. And also South African Airways went bankrupt. So, between the two, there's nothing else going. You have to go through Ethiopia. But what will happen is as it really is a 6-hour flight. But it's not really a 6-hour flight, it's a 9-hour flight, because there's no other airline in the world that can't fly over other countries for fear of being shot out of the sky, except for El Al. Because only the Jews are the target of countries like Sudan. And now that it's normalized, it will be different. So instead of going straight up, you'd have to go straight up and you turn to the east, and then fly over the Red Sea to avoid all the North African countries. So you pay more money, pay more fuel. Why? Because Jews are different. And so as you fly up the Red Sea and you look out your left window, you can see the entire coast of the Sinai Peninsula, which it comes to the Red Sea. And somewhere there is where this happens. You can say this bracha if you're flying that way. So if you're flying over the Red Sea, you are allowed to say this bracha, because somewhere in that coast must have been the miracle. Ma'abra Se'adan, where they crossed the Jordan. God willing, if we take our trip, we're going to see that area. Okay, this is a special bracha. We know exactly where that was. Ma'abra Nach Arnon. That is a little hard. That's in Jordan today. That's where the valleys closed in Parshas Chukas, killing the ambushes in another story, not for now. The valley of Arnon, and then Avnei Algavish B'morad Beis Choron. The stones of Algavish, the stones that came from the heaven in Beit Choron, which means the Mishnah says at the end you need to make a bracha. You need to make a bracha. Now, folks, just one of these realities about hailstones. They do terrible damage, but in 10 minutes they're not there, right? It's an amazing thing, right? How much damage frozen water can do to you. But so it seems that from the fact that this Bryce is describing this, that people actually saw this, which means to say there was a residue of this experience, which means it probably wasn't hail, which means translating stones as hailstones is trying to be rationalizing what actually happened. It sounds like something more was occurring. In fact, when I was examining the Dat Mikra, this is Rav Yehuda Kiel's observation on this, he says, from the fact that this Mishnah says it says it must have been Resisei Avonim Haboim Mikochavim Shisporadu Bechalal Meteorim Balaz. He suggested this was some sort of meteor shower. Meaning we're talking about something much more significant than a hailstorm, right? Stones from the heavens means that there was something more as well. In fact, there are those who say that if you go to Beit Choron today, you can see the stones on the mountain. Now, this is I put a picture on the bottom of page 6. This is what Beit Choron looked like a number of years ago. There's actually a religious settlement. I hate using the word settlement. There's a religious village, right? Arabs don't have settlements. They have cities and villages, and Israel have only settlements apparently, right? Because if you're living there for decades, apparently it's still called a settlement. But nonetheless, if you look, so they say that there's a lot of stones on the slope of Beit Choron. You can go there today. I don't know, if you go to past any hill in Judea, there are lots of stones, and it's been a long time, so it's hard to say precisely this is why these are those stones from the meteorite shower. But nonetheless, that is this miracle. We just wanted to point out that this does not seem to just be a localized hailstorm that happened at the right time. It seems to be there's something more going on over here. And we don't say the bracha because we don't know precisely what's happened. A lot has occurred between then and now to actually identify where they are. But now we move to the next sign, which is the sun stopping. This is a very famous painting on the top of page 7 in the 1700s. By Montpellier, who did it's entitled Joshua Ordering the Sun to Stand Still. So sort of see the nation of Israel coming to battle on the right side and sort of pointing towards the sun over the battle, ordering it to stop, and obviously the sun's going down tapering towards the horizon. Wait, we need the day to be able to conquer our enemies. We do not have night vision goggles in these days. We are not able to fight at night. We aren't able to fight in the winter in general, right? Just to understand that we're very limited to daylight to be able to fight, causing the sun to stay still. What is really going on over here? There's a lot to describe. The Midrash Tanchuma in Achrei says an unbelievable thing. It says that the wording in this pasuk is actually very precise. It's not exactly as we thought it might be. The Midrash says, Bikesh Yehoshua l'shatek et hachava. He wanted to, what's the word l'shatek? To silence. The word lishtok. To silence the sun. He does not say stay. He doesn't say wait. That's not the words he uses. Elodom. What's the word dom mean? Silence. Vayidom Aaron. Silence. Now, folks, I don't know about you. The sun is not the loudest entity that we have to deal with on earth. When you get closer to it, believe me, it's very loud. But we're not hearing the sun. What does it mean the sun silenced? So it says, Loma Omar Dom. Why does he say silence? Shekol Shah Shuholech. Hu mekales la Kodesh Baruch Hu calls man shu mekales yesh bo koach la'alech lachen amar la Yehoshua l'sheyishtoik. Meaning to say she'nemar shemesh b'givon dom. What he means to say silence is how does the sun sing praise to God? By doing what it should be doing. If it's not doing what it should be doing, it's no longer singing the song of creation because it can't do what it should be doing. So what does it mean? Silence means stop. By being stopped, you're not singing the song to God by doing what you're naturally programmed to do. That's what's happening over here, which is a very fascinating way of understanding creation in general. How do human beings sing? We decide to sing. How does a dog sing? A dog sings by obeying its natural algorithms inside of it because that is godly. How does the sun sing? The sun sings by obeying the natural laws of physics. Newton's third laws. Two bodies will pull at each other with an equal equal tension, and it is proportional to the radius of both of them, and is inversely proportional to the distance between them. Right? That's Newton's third equation. That rule is what's happening with the sun, and that is stopping right now. In fact, the Malbim goes so far as to say this is pretty miraculous in the sense that let's say you wanted to stop a mill from running. When I was growing up, we used to go to Cape Town for vacation, and we had an apartment in a block of apartments called Albion Mill. Why was it called Albion Mill? Because just across the road there was a beautiful river, and that river was connected to an old mill called Albion Mill. And every day they would allow the old mill to go, they would allow the river to pass through, and it would the river would pass through the mill, which would have this like large wheel. The wheel would be turned by the water, and it would be used to crush the grain. It's now a historic site, but you could hear the mill going every morning. That's a water mill. So says the Malbim, if you wanted to stop a water mill, there would be two ways of doing it. One is you could stop the water flow, meaning the energy is stopping, so therefore the process stops. There's another way you could do it, and that is you could actually allow the water to carry on, but actually hold the stone in place, which is much more difficult because now you have the force coming in and you're trying to, in a static way, hold it. That's much more difficult. And he said it does not say that all celestial spheres stopped. It just says the sun and the moon, which means everything else was moving. So that means to say that God, in a certain sense, is holding in stasis just two celestial bodies. Everything else continued, which is much more of a profound miracle. And that's the way it's understood. This enters into the conversation that we've had beforehand, is how does God do miracles precisely? According to the Malbim, God has the license and the ability to do what he wants when he wants. So if he created the sun that works in a certain way, he's going to allow it to stop and start as he decides to. However, there are those who say this doesn't make so much sense in that respect. As an example, the Ralbag, we saw this Gersonides. Remember that Gersonides was in fact an astronomer, among many other things. He was also a philosopher and a mathematician, but Gersonides, who was one of the great Rishonim, Rabbi Levi ben Gershon, writes a commentary on Nach, among many other things, and he says, look, I've been studying astronomy, and that's not the way it works. You can't stop one body and expect everything else to work. It doesn't work like that. And in fact, if that had been the truth, if God had really stopped the sun from moving, that would be the greatest miracle ever to have occurred under the auspices of a human being in the entire Torah and history. Because it just doesn't happen, right? And if that's the case, that would mean to say that Yehoshua performed a greater miracle than Moshe Rabbeinu performed anywhere. Meaning all of Moshe Rabbeinu's miracles that he performed, all the Makos of Mitzrayim, were terrestrial. This is celestial. There's no one who's ever done anything like this. And therefore you'd expect the Torah to say, but the Torah says no. Lo kol b'Moshe k'Moshe od. There's no one like Moses. Like, how does that work precisely? So the Ralbag rejects this premise. And also it sounds like it says Hashem is fighting the fight. It doesn't sound like he's in heaven. So what is going on here? Says the Ralbag, you know what it must be? It's describing it from the human point of view. Meaning like this. They needed to fight this battle. They needed to kill their enemies before they escaped, ran back to their villages and regrouped and attacked Israel again. They needed time. So what did God do? God facilitated this battle so fast, so quickly, that they were able to kill everybody as if time stood still. From their perspective, time was waiting. It was as if the day lasted longer than it ever had because they were so efficient. Everything went right. They got every enemy at the right point. There was not a moment that they lost the enemy. It was from their perspective, the sun was standing still. And this is how you would describe a moment in time which stopped. That's what's being described, says Rabbi ben Gershon. And in a certain sense, we all say to ourselves, that's a little bit of a letdown, right? Here's this moment in time, there's this description of a miracle, and the Ralbag is just saying they really did so much that day. But I'd like to go a little bit further in history because it is important to appreciate this. The Ralbag is trying to say is that God does do miracles, but God doesn't also stop the system. He does miracles within the system, and he created the system, so he has the right to, but he works within that system, as we've seen before about the Jordan stopping, right? But listen to this interesting observation, and that is that happens to be that here you have a description in this pasuk of the sun and the moon and something happening over the Emek Ayalon, of the valley of Ayalon, right? By the way, what do you think about Ayalon? We think about the highway system, right? The Ayalon interchange by Jerusalem, right? That's near the Ayalon Valley, right? So that's what we're talking about, right? No highways, we're talking about battles and suns and moons. But it's describing the sun and the moon stopping, not doing what they should be doing. So there's a lot of literature which is written. I put in an article here from Oxford, which has an amazing observation, and that is, they said like this, what experience would it be described by human beings who don't have the words to describe this experience, which relates to both the sun and the moon and the way that people relate to time, and that is a solar eclipse. And in fact, they went back, and you can map out all to the future and all to the past, all solar eclipses that occurred. And they found that in the year, let me just make sure I got the year 1207 before Common Era, which matches exactly with when we're talking about here. In October of that year, we know that there was a solar eclipse which affected the main area in Israel, which means to say on the afternoon of the 30th of October in the year 1207 before Common Era, there was a solar eclipse which occurred over main Israel, meaning they were in the pathway of that eclipse. Now, there's a reason this is fascinating for a number of reasons. Number one is, it's important to know if you've spoken to people who've been to eclipses. So a few of us actually went to Texas last year to see the solar eclipse, the totality down in Texas. It was an incredible experience. We took a whole group from the shul. It was in April. It can only occur in April and October. So we went there and we saw the solar eclipse. One of the things you described today, it's all mapped out, and we read all the blogs and everybody's saying everything about it, but reverse yourself a few hundred years and think about when you didn't have the news telling you what's going to happen. The description, this is a quotation on page 9, in the middle paragraph, to everyone the 2 minutes of the eclipse were like 2 hours. This is a description from the 1800s. Several people whom I questioned after the eclipse regarding the duration of totality replied that it lasted for 2 hours. Meaning when you experience a solar eclipse, you feel like time, it feels very eerie. It feels like everything is off. It feels like the world has stopped for those moments when you're experiencing totality. It is not the same. You can see a 90% eclipse from New York, and you will not appreciate what a totality means until you've actually experienced it. It is a terrifying experience. The birds start chirping. The world goes dark. It feels like time stands still. That is what happens in a totality. Now, look at the last paragraph. In attempting to describe this double dusk, meaning there was a double dusk on that day, the sun set twice on that day, it is only natural that the Israelites would have done so in terms of their normal experience of the diurnal cycle. Although aware that on this occasion, that the time interval between two dusks was less than the normal day, the book of Joshua records about a whole day, right? I mean, the whole day the sun stood. It says for this period of time. In fact, the Hebrew text here is like a whole day. The preposition like also means as, and so the phrase can mean as on a whole day. Thus, the analogy being employed is one of the following the diurnal rise and fall of the ground illumination, which means the Ralbag was not even being able to predict this. But if you want to go in the more rationalistic way of understanding this, it is very possible that what occurred over here was a solar eclipse during the middle of a battle, which confounded the enemy, gave them more opportunity in that confusion to win. And that's what it means that the sun and the moon were not operating. Doim means to say they were silent from their usual function. The sun is not operating anymore. And therefore, that is what they're describing in the words of experiencing this unbelievable celestial moment at the right moment, exactly during the battle, as could not have been planned otherwise. This is another way of looking at this. The Malbim would shake his head and say, not necessary, right? But the Ralbag would say, I've looked at the celestial bodies and they don't just stop, right? So it must be something else is going on over here, which matches why the moon is also mentioned, not just the sun. You don't see the sun and the moon in the afternoon usually, except in the early evening. So it must be something about the sun and the moon, which is a possibility of understanding this. Again, folks, we read these psukim, you think, you know what's going on? There's so much beneath the surface. Let's take it one step further. It says specifically that this event was recorded in the Sefer HaYashar. Folks, did you ever read a Sefer HaYashar? There are a few written, but they're written in the last 1,000 years. That's recent in Jewish history. The Tanakh is not referring to the book of your Sefer HaYashar written by Rabbeinu Tam, right? There was one that he wrote. There's a few, right? But what is the Tanakh referring to when it refers to Sefer HaYashar? This event. Can we find this? Can we find the external source that Tanakh is quoting this other book and read it? And I'd love to see what it says, So the Ralbag says, yes, there was another book. There was books of annals of history that Tanakh is referring to, and it was lost. We don't have it anymore, right? But there was another. The Tanakh is trying to say there's an external reference. You don't believe me? Read it in Sefer HaYashar, right? Read it in the annals of history at the time, and you will find that this experience is recorded. We don't have it anymore. Never, right? That's what the Ralbag suggests. However, not everybody agrees with that. Rashi says Sefer Yashar actually refers usually to what we usually assume it means? The Torah itself, which means the Torah. Where would it be in the Torah exactly? I don't remember anything about sun stopping being talked about in the Torah exactly. Do you? The answer is it depends. Look at what Rashi says over here. I'm just going to pull this up for a moment. Rashi says on the top of the last page, Halei Ksuva Dovazeh Nichtav Torah. Shamar Yaakov li Yosef. Yaakov says to his son Yosef, V'zaro yeh Meloi Hagoyim. His son will be in charge or powerful over all the nations. Emosai b'yom she'amda Chama li Yehoshua. Nismale kol olam shimoy shel Yehoshua. Meaning to say this. When Yaakov is giving a bracha to Yosef, and specifically to his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, he says, your children will be the fear, will be in charge of the whole world. Where does Yehoshua stem from? What's his lineage? He's from Ephraim. Your son is going to have a moment in time where everybody's going to know about him. When is that? That's referred to over here. Hallo Sefer Yashar refers back to that moment Rashi is identifying is in Sefer Yashar referring to Bereshis. Bereshis itself specifically is called Sefer Yashar. The Malbim says, I can do better than that. The Malbim says, if you look in Parashas Kisisa, again, assuming that Sefer Yashar refers to the Torah itself, look in Parashas Kisisa, and again, you hear these psukim and you don't realize the significance of them. The Torah tells us in Shmois perek lamed daled, Vayomer. This is after Moshe Rabbeinu has just received the 13 attributes of mercy. We read this every fast day. Vayomer im namatzah sichem enecha Hashem yelech na Hashem ekirbeinu ki am ksher refu v'salachta lavaninu lachatzasenu lachatanu. Hashem has just said, I'm going to send a malach. I'm going to send a messenger to bring you into the land of Israel. I'm not going to be with you. Moshe Rabbeinu says, please Hashem, we need you. Forgive the people. They made a mistake. Let you come with us when you come to the land. Vayomer. And Hashem says, Hinei anochi kores bris neged kol amcha. I'm going to make a covenant. And he has the covenant. I'm going to create wonders which you have never ever seen in your life. I'm going to show you the actual acts of God which are in your midst. When? Here's your side of the deal. You need to come and listen to what I just said. Your side of the deal is, when you enter the land of Israel, you need to chase out the other nations because you're going to be influenced by them. My side of the bris is, I'll do wonders in front of you like no one has ever seen. Says the Malbim, that's it. Meaning, God is saying, if you're going to do your job properly, then I'm going to do my job with you. I'm going to show you that I'm aligning myself with you. Which means, when is this happening? When the first real battle happens against the entire southern region of Israel, the Canaanite nations, if you're going to listen to my covenant, I will show you wonders you have never seen. That's Halai Kesova Be'Sefer Yashar, says the Malbim. You read the Torah in a completely different way when you read it. What's being described here. Unbelievable. Let's conclude the perek as well, just for a moment. One or two small observations, and we'll close. And that is, why did Yehoshua wait to kill all the kings? He could have just killed them right away. Why did he close the caves and then run back and then take them back? So the Yehoshua knows something very important in a military battle, and that is, it's not about the leader. And unfortunately, in Israel today, we keep cutting off heads of snakes, and they keep growing more heads, right? Unfortunately, right? It's now been the head of the Revolutionary Guard. It's been the head of Hamas recently. It's been the head of Yemen, the Houthis. Unfortunately, it doesn't take too long to regrow those heads. Which means Yehoshua is saying is, don't kill the heads, kill the people who put the heads on them, right? Which means let's get rid of the people before they reinstate a king. So, and the Malbim explains, you know how he says, if you read this perek carefully, you'll see that there are two kings of Hebron killed. The first king of Hebron is hiding in the cave, but when they get back to Hebron, there's a new king there. Which means Yehoshua is saying, kill the people who will appoint the king, not the king. A very important point in terms of military strategy. And as we finish, I just want to close with one question, because time is against us, and that is like, why is it that there needed to be this celestial experience, right? Meaning, these are two miracles. You can try to rationalize them in whatever terms you want, and you can explain the natural events that are occurring. But like, why? Like, why is this necessary? After all, we've been seeing the opposite. We've been seeing a diminishing of divine intervention. The walls of Jericho fall, they fight a real battle. In the battle of Ai, there wasn't even a supernatural intervention. It was a subterfuge, right? There was forces on the north, the forces on the west. There was the ambush that occurs, the burning of the city behind them, the whole business. We saw that, right? So it seems to me we're moving towards weaning God's intervention. Now suddenly, boom, like meteorites and eclipses or sun standing still. Like, you're like, what is going on over here? Like, why? What happened? Why do we need this? Why is this precisely necessary? I've not found any good answers necessarily yet, although it does relate to what we've been saying. When Israel acts morally, right, Hashem seems to show that he is part of this. But I think that most profoundly this is a demonstration of what it means to live in the land of Israel. I think that's what's being described over here. God does want to wean them of miracles, but God also wants to show them that moral actions warrant God's intervention directly in Israel, unlike being in the diaspora. And as the Malbim points out, what does it mean? And this is the last thing we'll read together. I just think it's so profound. When the Malbim comments on that Medrash Tanchuma, which talks about the sun being silent, the Malbim in source 10 says, Aval achar ki hashavisa azois lo haisa mikris rak bechiris. This stopping of the sun was not circumstantial, but it was based on free will. It was based on a choice. Al Yedei Yehoshua Yisrael Mesharasav. Yehoshua is calling the sun to stop, and it stops. It shows you Oiseritz on Ola Arois Ki Al Yodom Yishaded HaMa'areches Bahashgachasai, which means is that human actions have drastic ramifications, even celestially. And I want to show you what this can look like. I want to show you what it means to live in the land of Israel. If you abide by your calling, whether it's listening to the psukim and kisisa and obliterating the nations, not going to influence them, whether it's abiding by the covenants you made with your mouth, even though it was mistakenly, and protecting those minorities that you agreed to protect, if you do your calling, I will show you that this land will respond to you. Not just terra firma, but the celestial spheres themselves will come to your calling as well. And I think this sets into motion a relationship, a dynamic relationship of the nation of Israel and the land they live on in a way that is going to be so profound, because how many of us have lived, how many of our family members have lived in a way where you live in Israel and things just align in a way you don't expect it. And this alignment is what it means to live in Israel, which is, I think, being demonstrated at this most incredible juncture of battle as well. There's so much to appreciate. What we're going to do next week is going to do a wrap-up of understanding what this military conquest succeeded at, and perhaps the parts that we did not succeed at. God willing, thank you so much, everybody, for